Well, thank you, Rosa, and good morning, friends and colleagues. All protocols not observed. 5 years ago, when I stood before you at the second World Congress of Agroforestry in Nairobi, you'll recall that our conference theme at that time was Agroforestry, the future of global land use. At the time, I know some of you may have thought that that was a bit over the top, a bit presumptuous. Howard didn't think so, but some may have thought so. But when we look at how much things have changed during the last 5 years, it seems to me that the vision of agroforestry as the future of global land use was indeed totally in line with the developments on the ground and the changes in the direction of the global community in response to the huge challenges that we're facing. The last 5 years have not only supported our contention, they've provided a huge further momentum that was indeed not immodest at all. And today I'd like to share with you some observations about why I believe that we were on the right track, and still are, in projecting the theme of this Congress, which is trees for life, or perhaps trees for the life of the planet. The agroforestry that we see is becoming crucial for life on Earth, and that now we must strengthen the tasks to accelerate the impact of agroforestry everywhere on the face of the globe. For indeed, agroforestry will be seen throughout the top levels of international affairs in the future as an essential component of achieving the world's new post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals. Now, the process of identifying the SDGs is still very much a work in progress, but the outlines that are emerging indicates that they will be an expansion and an extension of the Millennium Development Goals. They will focus on a number of areas that will bring agroforestry into center stage. Some of the areas which the MDGs focused on are shown here in green. And some of the areas that appear to be new elements that will emerge in the SDGs are in black. The Millennium Development Goals focus primarily on such issues as food security, poverty eradication, health, gender equity, and universal education. But the SDGs will go beyond, most assuredly. They will continue to address these imperatives, but they will also cover such needs as reversing land degradation, climate change resilience, biodiversity conservation, and energy for all. Now, there are a multitude of ways that agroforestry science and development will contribute to these SDGs, and in the limited time today, I'd just like to comment on a few of them. Particularly, combating land degradation, building the resilience to climate change, and ensuring food security in the face of these threats. I am heartened by the extent to which it appears that combating land degradation will be featured in the Sustainable Development Goals. This is a bit surprising, considering how low on the agenda it has been for so long. The proposal on the table is to confirm a Sustainable Development Goal to achieve zero net land degradation by 2030. And the UN Working Group on SDGs, in which I participated, I was extremely encouraged to witness the broad-based support for such an aspiration by so many countries, particularly the African countries and the European countries. Of course, reaching zero net land degradation is not good enough by any measure. But at the alarming rate at which land is degrading currently in so many parts of the world, the first order of business is to reach neutrality in the next 2 decades. And then, of course, to turn the tide into positive territory thereafter. Now, the current trend is not all downhill, however. The recent analysis suggests that there has been a positive direction in terms of net primary productivity in some regions that are shown in green here. But there are also many places that are severely degrading fast. What I think is important is that there is much to be gained by examining what's happening in those green spot areas on the map as we seek to address the serious degradation that's occurring in the red spots. And that brings me to things that are happening that are very, very encouraging. Take the case of Niger, the poorest country in the world, where over the last 20 years, 5 million hectares of croplands have become populated, dominated by fertilizer, fodder, fuelwood trees. This is the farmer-managed natural regeneration of indigenous trees on continuously cropped farmlands, something that's been below the radar screen of agroforestry for far too long. In fact, it was the people, over 1 million farm households, who by their own volition and sweat equity did the job of creating that incredible tree cover on croplands in the Sahel. Now, Tony Ronaldo is with us today and his wife Liz, and I'd like to acknowledge their presence because Tony, please Tony, stand up to be acknowledged by the group. If you would put your hands together for Tony. This gentleman was instrumental in jump-starting this process 20 years ago from the most modest circumstances. And he's with us here today. Liz has been with him working 17 years in Niger. Tony received the UNCCD Land for Life Award last year on behalf of the heroic efforts that he and so many colleagues, and as I said, 1 million farm households contributed to this transformation. Tony, do you recall the interesting question that you raised yesterday? Would scientists have ever come up with such a system of farmer-managed natural regeneration of trees on farmlands on their own if farmers hadn't already done so? It's a very interesting question. But I'm proud that the UN Convention on Combating Desertification has chosen to highlight the role of these kinds of agroforestry opportunities on a big scale in achieving the needed progress by asking me to serve as Drylands ambassador and spread the word about these sorts of developments. And indeed, this was the desertifying landscape that Tony started off with the work in Niger, so 30 years ago. Now let us turn to an even more dire situation than land degradation: the darkening clouds portending a global climate change catastrophe. Just a little over a year ago, the World Bank issued this study, which looked at the projected efforts or effects of a 4-degree increase in global temperature by the end of the century. They were indeed catastrophic projections. But just a couple of months ago, new comprehensive research published in Nature made even this estimate look modest, and that by the end of the century, temperatures exceeding 4 degrees are now not just possible, but very, very likely. Soon, the world's agriculture community will begin to get serious about the threat of declines in crop yield potential and massive production losses due to intensifying droughts. And when they do, they will begin to get desperate enough to look outside the conventional boxes for solutions. They will begin to take a serious look at the numerous ways by which the incorporation of trees directly into crop production systems will help alleviate these looming disasters. And they will see the humble Phythermia tree for what African farmers have long known it is: an icon of how trees can buffer the microclimate of crops and forestall the effects of higher temperatures and drought stress in many different ways. For indeed, this data that's just been out from CIMMYT, doing work with wheat in association with Phytherbia in Ethiopia, shows just what kind of microclimate buffering is possible. And we are beginning to get our friends in the cereal crop research system interested in trees in crop fields. I don't know how much you realize how monumental that change in their behavior and attitude is to our cause. For African farmers have shown us for a long time the way to successfully integrate trees into cropping systems. So when will we fully catch up and deploy their insights? When will science really take the lead in using these insights properly in transforming our systems? When will the world see, as we do, that agroforestry is truly the gold standard in climate-smart agricultural practices? It ticks all the boxes for the triple win: increased productivity, enhanced resilience, and reduced greenhouse gas emissions. So indeed, that's the story before us. But there are some far-sighted people out there, and here in this room. But one of them is the Conservation Farming Unit in Zambia. You know, conservation agriculture is all the rage in agricultural development these days, and for good reason. But in Zambia, they have gone beyond the conventional approaches to zero-tillage systems, and they're promoting a conservation agriculture with fertilizer trees in the system to hundreds of thousands of farmers in that country. A real evergreen revolution. And they are doing so effectively that the international seed companies, like Pioneer Seeds, are now evaluating all of their hybrids for these evergreen agriculture systems. Pioneer has seen the future. When will the seed and fertilizer industry join us and see the future as well? And there are so many other models of fertilizer, fodder, fuel wood tree species, field geometries, and management systems that ought to receive more of our attention in science and development, both present models and future ones. Now take this one in which farmers incorporate a fast-growing fertilizer tree that is polarded during the growing season and produces its biomass in the dry season, along with slower growing but very long-lived trees. Such a system is very plastic. There are many choices of species for the densely populated and polarded nitrogen-fixing trees, and even for the full canopy trees, because you could replace Phytherbia here with Grevillea, a timber tree, or a fruit tree, and provide all sorts of models for farmers to consider in building a higher land equivalent ratio. These polarding evergreen agriculture systems are in particular one that I think has received far too little attention, because the dispersed shade, very slight dispersed shade during the growing season, is complemented by biomass increase in the dry season. And they are minimizing labor inputs into the farming system. So we can manage canopies in any number of ways. And there have been some excellent papers here that have talked about that, because trees in cropping systems are not relegated to full canopy. They can be pruned in various shapes and sizes in order to meet the requirements of a food crop system. These are manifestations of an evergreen agriculture, a brand name for tree crop intercropping. Now, some may ask, what is this relatively new term, evergreen agriculture, all about? I've been asked that question many times. But it's quite as simple, really. It's a brand inspired by none other than Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, the father of the Green Revolution here in India. And it's a brand to connect agroforestry with what I call the hardcore Aggies. Howard, you know who I'm talking about. These are the mainstream agriculture, research, development, and commercial people, the crops and soils people that own center stage in agriculture, who have continued for so long to totally ignore agroforestry. Hey, let's face it, how many of those folks are in the room with us today? How many people who are really agriculturists, agronomists, soil scientists who work with crops are here with us today? I rest my case. Very, very few. So, why? They simply don't see agroforestry as relevant to the core problems of their domain. And that's the problem. That's got to change. And soon. And we've got to reach out to them. In fact, I'm hoping that we set a goal, Tony, a goal that in 5 years' time we have a massive representation from that hardcore Aggie sector, because they're the ones who should be listening to what's going on in the science that you're talking about here. But they need to know, and they need to be coaxed to get involved with us. But that is something that we should take up seriously. Right. Well, I'd like you to ask yourself if you could guess who said these words. Some people say, give the customers what they want. But that's not my approach. Our job is to figure out what they're going to want before they do. Henry Ford once said, you know, if I asked customers what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. People don't know what they want until you show it to them. That's why I never rely on market research. Our task is to read things that are not yet on the page. Anybody want to yell out who said those words? There you go. Steve Jobs. And what is the message for us? Steve was, of course, the premier risk taker. He put it all on the line, and he brought us the iPad, the iPhone, and the iPhone and the iPod as well. We need some more Steve Jobs in agroforestry, to take more risks like Steve did, try out unconventional models for getting trees into crop production systems, and to have faith that those products will be adopted, that people will come when you've got the right set of choices. We've had our disappointments in agroforestry, the alley cropping syndrome, the improved fallow syndrome. They were failures, perhaps, but they were failures that helped us to learn for success. Do you know the iPod took 30 years of failed attempts and multiple product releases before it ever succeeded? And when Steve was working on it, everybody thought he was crazy, that no one would buy one because for 30 years, 10 companies had failed. Well, the point is, we've got to develop those systems that overcome the constraints that we've identified and make it possible to have dynamite products in agroforestry. And they're happening. We have some. For example, Christian Duprat and the Agroforestry Pioneers in Europe are busy developing brand new agroforestry systems for the continent. And they're sparking some serious attention because, as you know or may not know, Artmans and colleagues just a few months ago published a paper that indicated that indeed 90% of the greenhouse gas emissions potential from European agriculture over the next 30 years will be from agroforestry. That is perking up the attention of policymakers. And for those that are not listening, Patrick Burns is over in Brussels beating them up over the head with that information and making waves in terms of a change in the agroforestry policies of Europe. There are other more radical visions out there that are being realized by farmers, such as that in this book by a farmer from Wisconsin named Mark Shepard. Now, this guy has developed a system, which he calls restoration agriculture, that is commercializing multi-story tree crop systems along with livestock in systems that are totally revolutionary for the American Corn Belt. And I've always believed if we could make progress in transforming the American Corn Belt, agroforestry would be a cinch anywhere else. So there are those pioneers to look to and to work with in the next 5 years. Now, to sum up, we've identified 3 basic types of some of these innovative systems for integrating crops, integrating trees into croplands. We've talked about natural regeneration on farmlands, conservation agriculture with trees, and of course the many, many types that you're working on in terms of conventional food crop production, intercropped with timber, fruit, medicinal, and fuelwood, and many other kinds of trees. Now let's turn our attention briefly to the challenge and opportunities of scaling up agroforestry to transform agriculture around the world. Because it's not enough for us to discover something, we've got to figure out how to get it adopted on a big scale. But we've been given a huge impetus by what's beginning to happen in the Sahelian zone, where a whole lot of investment organizations, donors, the banks, and the countries are coming together to actually envision and apply, with billions of dollars of funding flow, supporting the creation of the Sahel as a great green wall against the Sahara. And the successful agroforestry systems based on farmer-managed natural regeneration that are being practiced now in these areas across the Sahel are the green spots for expansion on a vast scale in this particular region. I think it is a model for many other regions and countries to look at in terms of scaling up from the green spots where things are successfully happening. And indeed, we are getting the attention of governments, not only here in Africa, but also in South Asia and other parts of the world. There are now 17 countries in Africa that are scaling up evergreen agriculture, and we're building the kind of partnerships to be able to succeed in that. And that leads me to the issue of the kinds of partnerships that we need to develop. We need to be able to have partnerships not only with our fellow scientists or to pass off information to our development partners. We've got to work with them hand in hand. We've got to hug them. We've got to work with them day to day and figuring out the mechanisms within our organizations to make that happen effectively. I think that this is going to be the big frontier over the next 5 years because I believe the world is waking up to agroforestry. They're looking for our science, but we've got to shake hands with them. And that is going to be where we ought to be putting a lot of attention. Creating the right partnerships and living those partnerships. And the partnership on evergreen agriculture that we have been developing over the last few years is a kind of institutional innovation where scientists are involved, but the key issue is the partners, the governments, the NGO communities, the farmer groups, the other institutions that want to take up agroforestry and need constant interaction and relationships, not the every so often type of thing. And that's what we're experimenting with in terms of the Evergreen Agriculture Partnership at the global level and also at the local level in the countries. So what do we need to do to fully mobilize for the upcoming global revolution in agroforestry upscaling? Here's just a few things. There are many left off the list, but I wanted to emphasize some things that need a little more attention. There's an urgent need to map agroforestry across the world at global, regional, and national scales. It's almost criminal that we don't have such maps already. We must fill the gap and fill it urgently because in fields like livestock, it revolutionized the way people looked at planning for livestock research because they had maps of livestock systems. We have no such maps of agroforestry, although Bob Zomer has just updated the 10-year tree cover analysis, but that's just tree cover. We need to know what our agroforestry systems are like all across the world. And as I was talking with one of our colleagues from FAO the other day, we need a global agroforestry assessment, not just a forest resources assessment. We need to have countries involved in developing and reporting their data on the expansion of agroforestry as well, because agroforestry is not forestry. It is agriculture with trees, and it's not being covered at all by the FRA. That leads us to develop a global plan to upscale agroforestry. It's something we haven't talked about at all, really, I think, within ICRAF, but that sort of a plan could be a hierarchical plan to guide the developments of strategic targeting country by country, region by region, across the entire globe. Of course, we would only do that if we believed that agroforestry had a future of upscaling. And it's time that we do. And then finally, we've got to figure out how to staff up in our research organizations to link agroforestry science to development. This is a huge, huge issue because we are not jumping the gap. We need to have professional staff within research organizations who can make that transformation. And before I close, I've got to say that, in terms of our long-term view for agroforestry, Howard emphasized the importance of genomics to our trees. And I always think of the holy grail of agroforestry genomics, and that is identifying and manipulating those precious genes for reverse phenology. Because as you know, if we could have lots of different tree species doing what Phythermia does, dormant during the wet season, wow, the revolution in agroforestry would be amazing. And so, Howard, we've got to find those genes. And thank you for your support in helping us to equip the labs and get going on doing this noble work. It may take decades, but this is the Holy Grail. And of course, Holy Grails are, long ways away. Well, let me close by saying that we are beginning to see glimpses of a trend that I believe will be at the heart of a truly sustainable planet: the perennialization of agriculture. Not just perennial crops, but the incorporation of perennials into all aspects of agriculture, including those amber waves of monoculture grain that seem to be the solution to all problems agriculture to our hardcore Aggie friends. But if we do our jobs well, we will soon find perennialization is actually seen as an absolutely essential element to sustaining food security, the SDGs, and a livable future on this planet. So be bold. Be bolder in your scientific research. Be ambitious in your goals for scaling up, and be the agents of change that the world needs now. And to paraphrase the immortal words of Tony Luke Skywalker Simons, may the agroforest be with you always. Thank you.